Hello and welcome. I am so happy that you are here. We are continuing in our study of the book of Judges, and we will be looking at Judges chapter 6, Gideon. So get yourself a cuppa and we'll get started. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I really look forward to reading some of your comments. So Gideon is one of the most well-known, important leaders in the book of Judges, and there are more verses about him than in any other judge. He grew up and he was called to lead the Israelites and free them from the hands of the Midianites. He defeated their armies with just 300 men, and the Israelites tried to make him king, but he refused. So looking straight into verse 1. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts, and it was impossible to count their camels. They invaded their lands and they ravaged it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to help from the Lord. The Israelites were so oppressed by the Midianites that they were not living their lives free in the open, but they had built shelters in the mountain caves and strongholds. The Midianites and the other armies would not trouble the Israelites until they had dared to plant their crops. Only then did the enemy of Israel start to invade. They would camp in Israel and destroy their crops and livestock. They weakened and impoverished the Israelites by destroying all their livelihoods and sources of food. The enemies were so large that they were not able to be counted. They had so many camels in their cavalry, which at that time was considered a significant military advantage. So, to continue repeating the cycle of sin, Israel had peace in the land for 40 years after the previous judge Deborah. And the people fell back into sin and idolatry. God sent an oppressor over Israel. Israel then cried out to God, and God sent a judge. Or in this case, he first sends an unnamed prophet. Verse 7. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord your God of Israel says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the hands of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you, and I gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." So the prophet, he reminds Israel of God's continued faithfulness and his mighty rescue of the people of Israel from their enslavement in Egypt. He reminds them of the numerous times he delivered Israel from their oppression, and how he defeated again and again their enemies and gave Israel their land. And the prophet reminds them that God commanded them not to worship any other gods. But Israel didn't listen and continued to do what they wanted, worshipping other gods and forgetting the Lord. Verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak of Ophrah, that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress to keep it from the Midianites. So we see two new characters introduced here. We see the angel of the Lord and we see Gideon. And we're just going to delve in a little bit of a side study for a while about this mysterious being, the angel of the Lord. So give us a few minutes diversion and then we'll get back to Gideon. So what is the angel of the Lord? The word angel simply means messenger, and more specifically, a messenger from God. And when we see the term angel of the Lord or angel of God, we need to determine whether it's a reference to an angel who is sent by God with a message to deliver his people, or whether it's something entirely different again. The angel of the Lord appears a number of times in the book of Judges. We've already seen him in Judges chapter 2, and he also appears in multiple times throughout the Old Testament. This angel of the Lord speaks as if he is God. He identifies himself with God, and he exercises the responsibility of God. On many occasions, the angel of the Lord is God himself, not just a messenger angel. And theologians refer to this as a theophany. So what's a theophany? There is a very thorough definition, and I like it because it captures all the right key elements of a theophany. But the definition is very thorough. Let's see. A theophany is an unsought, intermittent, and temporary, visible, audible manifestation of God the Son in human form, by which God communicated something to certain conscious humans prior to the birth and incarnation of Christ. A bit of a mouthful, but it does cover all the key components of a theophany. So I hope that exhaustive definition was clarifying to you. So on several occasions and at crisis times for God's people in the Old Testament, this amazing being appears. Generally speaking, the purpose of this appearance of the angel of the Lord is that he comes to lead, he comes to defend, he comes to communicate, sympathize, and reveal. He speaks with incredible authority and he acts with startling power. Sometimes he brings severe judgment and sometimes he brings gentle comfort. But he leaves those who have seen him with the certain knowledge that they have seen the Lord himself. And here in the story of Gideon, we later see that the angel of the Lord is just referred to as the Lord. See verse 14 and verse 16. And there are a number of indicators, and I'll go through them, they're not exhaustive, that will suggest a reference of the angel of the Lord is a reference to God himself. And when we see the words angel of the Lord, we can conclude it's God himself if it meets these following criteria. Identifies itself as God, has the power to give life, is all-knowing, can judge the earth, can receive worship, can accept sacrifices, can be seen by man without dying, can perform biological human functions, eating, walking, drinking, can perform miracles beyond human natural abilities, has no biological heritage or lineage. They reveal truths and they reflect the heart of Jesus Christ himself. So I hope that gives you a bit of context about the angel of the Lord. Back to Gideon. Gideon was the son of Joash. The reference to the Abiezer is a reference to Gideon's family. Abiezer is presumed to be a descendant of Manasseh and an ancestor of Gideon. And at the time, the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon. He is threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from being destroyed by the Midianite army. And since Gideon was threshing his wheat in a winepress rather than on a proper dedicated threshing floor, it is assumed that Gideon is hiding his crop from the Midianite raid. And it must not have been a very large crop because it was only able to be threshed in a small winepress. Threshing wheat in a winepress is both difficult and humiliating. Wheat is ordinarily threshed in an open place, typically on a hilltop where the breeze could blow away the chaff, and wheat is not normally threshed in a sunken place like a winepress. Gideon possibly chose this place because he was able to hide, and it was more secure than out in the open. So a little bit of interesting facts about threshing floors and wine presses. A threshing floor in biblical days, there was no machinery. So after the harvest, the grain was separated from the straw and the husks by being beaten manually. And first there was a flat surface and it was smooth and hard in a windy area, and this was known as the threshing floor. The process of threshing was generally that spread out the sheaves on the threshing floor, causing the oxen and the cattle to repeatedly tread over it, losing the edible part of the cereal grain from the other crops and the scaly, inedible chaff that surrounds it. And then they'd get the winnowing forks, and they'd use it and they would throw it up into the air, and the wind would blow away the chaff, leaving the good grain on the threshing floor. But on the other hand, a wine press, a Hebrew wine press is like a wine vat, and it's considered of an upper vat and a lower receptacle. The upper receptacle was for treading the grapes, and the lower one was for collecting the grape juice. And archaeologists have found ancient wine presses all through the land of Israel. Verse 12, the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior, he said. So, the angel says, the Lord is with you. And this is a strange greeting for Gideon, as it does not seem that the Lord is with Gideon or with Israel at the time, because they're oppressed by the Midianites. The angel of the Lord surprisingly refers to him as mighty warrior or valiant warrior or mighty man of valor, depending on your version. At this time, it didn't seem that Gideon was a mighty man of valor. He didn't seem mighty at all. In ancient times, warriors were observed and entrusted by multitudes of people, so they had to have a superb sense of strategic planning for their military forces, a thorough persuasion ability for communication, and consistent honourable spirit. And at this stage, it doesn't seem that Gideon meets the standard. Some commentators believe that the angel knew what great things God was going to do through using him, and called him such a name as to reflect that. Other commentators believe that this statement was made by the angel of the Lord as a prophecy of things to come. But God fully recognizes our weaknesses, yet he still calls us to follow him. And this means that we can trust him. If he calls us in our weakness, we are assured that he will provide his strength. Let's look at a verse from 1 Corinthians 1 verse 27. But God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Another verse from 2 Corinthians 12 verses 9, just the first part of it. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. Verse 13, pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the wonders of our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But why? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of Midian. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel from Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied. But how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Gideon's response comes from a place of confusion. Gideon reflects on all the oppression they've received at the hands of the Midianites, and he queries why this is the situation if the Lord is actually with them. Gideon knows all the miracles of the olden days, during the time of the patriarchs and the Exodus, but Gideon now feels as if the Lord has abandoned Israel and allowed them to be impoverished by the Midianites. But God doesn't address his concerns directly. It's as if Gideon's concerns are invalid and immaterial to the conversation. God simply responds by commanding Gideon with what little faith he has and what little strength he has, to save Israel by defeating the Midianites. And what strength Gideon lacks is increased as God questions him, am I not sending you? We learn that although Gideon does not have much strength, God is sending him, and God will provide everything that Gideon needs. But Gideon again questions God, making excuses for his weakness. We might self-reflect and ask ourselves what kind of excuses that we give God. How do you hold up against God's sovereignty? Any excuse that we have to delay or to avoid obedience withers before God and his presence. How different might our lives be if we would always obey God immediately without any excuse? Weaknesses are an advantage in the kingdom of God because it means that we are not relying on our own strength, but we're relying on God's strength, and He gets the glory. Sometimes it can be difficult to let go and let God, but we know full well that God is faithful and God is sovereign. Verse 16, the Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down the Midianites, leaving no one alive. And Gideon replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring an offering and set it before you. And the Lord said, I will wait until you return. To encourage Gideon, the Lord assures him with a promise that he will be with Gideon when he strikes down all of the Midianite army. None of them will survive. But Gideon is still uncertain and he asks the Lord for a sign. And we see the Lord's response there as a sense of compassion, a sense of patience. And God doesn't criticize Gideon for seeking a sign, and we learn that He is patient with us when we desire to be obedient, when we trust Him, but we're still confused and we're still uncertain. Gideon is encouraged and asks the Lord to wait until he brings his offering. So verse 19, Gideon went inside, he prepared a young goat from an ephah of flour, and he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and place it on this rock and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so, and the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of his staff that was in his hand. Fire flared out from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread. And the angel of the Lord disappeared. And when Gideon realized that this was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. So Gideon's sacrifice included a goat and unleavened bread. And considering the scarcity of food, this is a very significant sacrifice. It was literally a sacrifice for Gideon and his fellow Israelites to give to the Lord. So a goat was extremely valuable for two reasons. Its rarity and its scarcity in Israel at this time, because the Midianites had destroyed or attempted to destroy all the livestock. Secondly, it was valuable because goats were a great source of milk products, including cheese. They were fresh meat, and they grew wool for weaving cloth. An ephah of flour was approximately 22 litres of flour. This is a lot of flour, and it would have taken Gideon a lot of time to thresh this in his little wine press. And wheat was scarce to begin with because the Midianites would destroy their crops. A considerable amount of effort was required to obtain this amount from the threshing floor. And when the wheat and the grains, they had to be ground into flour by the mill, and he had to make the bread and bake it without being caught by another Israelite, or worse, being caught by a Midianite. So Gideon places his sacrifice on a rock and he covers it with the soup broth, drenching the sacrifice. And now there is no way that this would ordinarily be easily burnt. So the angel of the Lord, he touches it with his staff, and the staff was a tool used generally by shepherds, and it's sometimes used to symbolize power. Now, why would an angel need a staff if he wasn't the good shepherd? So the angel of the Lord, he touches the offering with his staff, and it is totally consumed by fire. And then the angel disappears, and Gideon realizes that he has seen the angel of the Lord. He appears to be worried because he has seen him face to face, and he thinks he's going to die. Gideon possibly recalls what God had said to Moses in Exodus 33, verse 20. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one can see my face and live. But again, our compassionate and patient God reassures Gideon. Verse 23, but the Lord said to him, peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die. So Gideon, he built an altar to the Lord there and he called it, the Lord is peace. And to this day it stands in Ophrah by the Abiezrites. So Gideon calls the altar of the Lord is peace. And don't you think God's words and wonders gave Gideon a sense of peace? Verse 25, that same night the Lord said to him, take a second bull from your father's herd, 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal, cut down the Asherah pole behind it, then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of this height. Using the wood from the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer a second bull as a burnt offering. So God wanted Gideon to cleanse his family of idolatry before beginning his work for the Lord. God requests a sacrifice of a bull, and again we should remember the cost of this sacrifice. Despite the Midianites' constant raids on Israel's livestock, Gideon's father had managed to keep a full-grown bull that was a 7-year-old bull. God calls Gideon to destroy his father's Asherah pole. This particular one was made of wood, and here is evidence that Israel had turned from God and were worshipping other idols after their 40 years of peace after the reign of Deborah. So the cycle of sin, it clearly continues. During a time when great respect was given to parents and where children were expected to obey their parents well into adulthood, this was a daring action on Gideon to destroy his father's idol. Verse 27. So Gideon took his 10 servants as the Lord had told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night time rather than at daytime. Again, we see that Gideon is afraid and he's cautious, and he engages the support of 10 servants. He does this under the cover of darkness, and Gideon is still operating out of fear, just as he was at the beginning of the story. But he trusts God anyway, and we can see his faith grow. Verse 28, in the morning when the people of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished, with the Asherah pole beside it, cut down, and the second bull sacrifice on the newly built altar. They asked each other, who did this? And when they carefully investigated, they were told that Gideon, son of Joash, did it. And the people of the town demanded that Joash bring out your son. He must die because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. So when the people of the town saw that the altar of Baal was torn down and the Asherah pole was destroyed and the bull was killed, and they were looking for someone to blame. And after investigation, they find it was Gideon, and they demand his execution for his actions. And it seems that the people of the town are more interested in the devastation of their idols than in honouring God. Verse 31. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead with Baal's cause? Are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by the morning. And if Baal is really God, he can defend himself when somebody breaks his altar. And this shows the wisdom of Gideon's father Joash, as the men of the city have reacted to the loss of their local shrine. Gideon's father made a very logical argument by preserving his son's life. Gideon's father stood up for his son and said that if Baal was really a god, let Baal deal with Gideon. So because Gideon broke down Baal's altar, this is verse 32, they gave him the name Jerubbaal that day, saying, let Baal contend with him. So in renaming Gideon, Jerubbaal to Jerubbaal, meaning let Baal contend with him, the people of the city were showing their unwavering loyalty to Baal. Verse 33. Now all the Midianites the Amalekites and all the eastern people, they joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. And then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon, and he blew his trumpet, summoning all the Abiezrites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, and so they went up to meet him. The phrase, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon in verse 34, is a phrase that occurs in the narratives of the other judges, and it's a sign that this person is appointed by God to lead Israel for this season. So Gideon summons an army from his family line, and he calls up the surrounding tribes, Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. Verse 36, Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor, and if there is dew on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day, he squeezed out the fleece and wrung it with dew, and it was a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Oh, don't be angry with me. Let me make one more request. Allow one more test with this fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and the ground be covered with dew." And that night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry and the ground was covered with dew. So Gideon, through obeying the Lord and still seeking a sign, God goes above and beyond, and he shows Gideon that he was with Gideon and will deliver the Midianites by his hand. So his sign was he made the fleece wet and the ground dry. But Gideon continues to doubt and asks for another sign, and God shows him another sign, this time the other way around. Looking back on the first 35 verses of Judges chapter 6, we can see a number of ways that God confirmed to Gideon that he was called by God to defeat the Midianites. We see that God sent a prophet to remind Israel of who God is. We see the angel of the Lord physically appeared to Gideon. The angel of the Lord miraculously set his soggy sacrifice on fire. The angel of the Lord continued to speak to Gideon later that night. God gave him courage to tear down the altars. God gave a sign of the wet fleece on dry ground, then God gave the sign of the dry fleece on wet ground. We see God confirm his calling to Gideon again and again. He told him several times through the messenger, and he affirmed it. He said by taking the offering, he protected Gideon when he tore down the pagan idols, and he provided an army for Gideon. Yet Gideon, he still questions whether he heard from God correctly. God is incredibly patient with Gideon, as it's revealed in these verses. And we are thankful that God is just as patient and compassionate toward us when we don't understand his ways. And God knows that if he calls the weak and disobedient people to follow him, he isn't surprised by Gideon's cowardice. Even as Gideon continues to question God and asks for signs, God persists in patience and keeps his word to Gideon. He never abandons Gideon, especially when his life is at stake. God deals with us in the same way. He is patient and he is kind and he is gracious to us. His faithfulness is never ending. And even in our sinfulness, he remains consistently faithful. And despite his fear, Gideon was courageous. And true courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather it's the ability to trust God despite our fear and still be obedient to his calling. And that's all I have for you today from Judges chapter 6. It's been a pleasure spending time with you, and I look forward to our next time as we continue with our story with Gideon, and we'll be looking at Judges chapter 7.